This 1911 factory portrait shows three children, but one detail proves they weren't workers at all. The photograph looked ordinary at first. Three small figures in patched clothes, standing outside a brick mill building on a gray afternoon. It could have been any child labor documentation shot from the Progressive era, the kind that reformers circulated to shock the public. Until Dr. Sarah Chen noticed the tag. Chen had been cataloging industrial photography collections at the Newark Public Library for 7 years. She had seen thousands of these images: children at looms, children in coal breakers, children with hollow eyes and missing fingers. This photo came from a donated estate, part of a leather portfolio that belonged to a municipal inspector named Edward Hargrove. The portfolio contained dozens of factory inspection records from 1910 to 1915, mostly unremarkable documentation of working conditions. This particular image was tucked near the back, labeled only with a date, March 1911. Three children stood against the wall of what appeared to be a textile mill. The smallest, a girl who could not have been more than 7, stood in the center. To her left was a boy, perhaps 9 or 10, with one shoulder higher than the other. To her right, another boy, slightly taller, stared past the camera with an expression Chen had learned to recognize. Not defiance, not sadness, absence. Behind them, a heavy-set man in a vest and shirt sleeves rested his hand on the middle boy's shoulder. The foreman, presumably. The kind of posed documentation shot that suggested cooperation with inspection protocols. Chen adjusted the LED magnifier over the photograph. The children's clothes were what you would expect. Rough cotton, patched at the elbows and knees. The girl wore a shapeless dress that hung past her knees. Both boys wore trousers held up with rope suspenders. Their faces were smudged with what might have been lint or dirt. Standard visual markers of child laborers in the textile industry. But there, at the collar of the smallest girl's dress, something caught the light. Chen increased the magnification. A brass tag about the size of a large coin was clipped directly to the fabric near her throat. Not pinned, clipped with what looked like a medical clamp. The tag was stamped with numbers, visible even in the age photograph, 2847. Chen had seen worker identification badges before. Mills sometimes required them, especially in the larger operations. But this tag was different. Too large for a child's collar, too clinical in its attachment, and the number format was wrong. Factory ID badges in this era typically used a letter number combination tied to the mill name. This was just digits, sequential, institutional. Chen sat back in her chair. Something here was wrong. She had been working in archival photography since finishing her doctorate in labor history. Newark's industrial past was her specialty, and she had handled enough mill documentation to know what belonged and what did not. Child labor photographs from this era followed predictable patterns. They were either clandestine shots taken by reformers like Louis Hine, or they were sanitized portraits commissioned by factory owners trying to prove compliance with newly passed regulations. This image fell into neither category cleanly. The photographer's stamp was visible in the bottom right corner of the print, embossed into the paper. Rothman Studio, 147 Market St. Chen knew the name. Jacob Rothman had been a commercial photographer in Newark's industrial district, one of several who contracted with city agencies and private businesses. His studio ledgers were preserved at the New Jersey Historical Society. If this was a commissioned documentation shot, there should be a record. Chen carefully removed the photograph from its mount. The backing was original, a thick cardboard with a manufacturer's mark from a paper company that had gone out of business in 1923. On the back, written in pencil, were 3 lines: Mill Number 4, Inspection Round, March 14, 1911, Special Placement, Special Placement. Chen turned the photograph over again and stared at the brass tag on the girl's collar. She picked up her phone and called Marcus Webb, a colleague who specialized in Progressive-era urban institutions. When he answered, she did not waste time on pleasantries. "I need you to look at something," she said. "I think I found children who weren't supposed to be there." Webb arrived within the hour. He was a tall man in his 50s who taught urban history at Rutgers and consulted for several museums. He had written extensively about Newark's reform movements and knew the city's institutional landscape better than anyone Chen had met. She showed him the photograph without explaining what had troubled her. He studied it for less than 30 seconds before he looked up. "That's not a worker badge," he said. Chen felt something settle in her chest. Confirmation. What is it? Webb pointed to the tag without touching the photograph. See how it's clipped, not pinned? And the number format? That's consistent with morgue identification from charity hospitals. St. Vincent's used that exact system. He paused. But that doesn't make sense. These children are standing. They're alive. Unless, Chen said slowly, they came from the hospital. Webb frowned. St. Vincent's had an orphanage attached. So did Newark City Hospital. Both institutions placed children in domestic service and apprenticeships. It was legal, encouraged even. But I've never seen documentation of them being placed in factories. How would you track that? Chen asked, if you wanted to find out whether this happened. Webb thought for a moment. Hospital records, admissions and discharge logs. The city kept oversight of institutional placements under the 1899 Child Placement Act, but the files are scattered. Some went to the state archives, some stayed with the institutions, some were destroyed in a fire in 1952. If there was a formal program, though, there should be municipal budget records. Money had to move. Chen photographed the image with her high-resolution camera, capturing every detail. Then she and Webb made a list: photographers' ledgers at the Historical Society, hospital archives at St. Vincent's and Newark City Hospital, municipal budget reports from the mayor's office, factory inspection records beyond Hargrove's personal collection, census data for the industrial district in 1910 and 1920, church records from parishes that served the immigrant and orphan populations. Over the next 2 weeks, Chen worked through the list methodically. The photographers' ledgers were her first stop. The New Jersey Historical Society kept Rothman's business records in 15 archive boxes, organized by year. Chen found the 1911 ledger on her second day. Rothman's handwriting was meticulous. Each commission was logged with a client name, date, location, and fee. March 14, 1911. Client, City of Newark, Inspector's Office. Location, Watterson Mill, 8th Avenue. Fee, $300. Notes, inspection documentation, special arrangement children, special arrangement. There it was again. Chen photographed the page. The Watterson Mill had been a mid-sized textile operation, one of dozens in Newark's industrial corridor. She found the mill's history in a directory of New Jersey manufacturers, owned by the Watterson family from 1897 to 1923, when it was sold and eventually demolished. The mill had employed between 80 and 120 workers during its peak years, producing cotton fabric for garment manufacturers in New York. Chen pulled the 1910 census records for the neighborhood surrounding the mill. She found factory workers, their families, boarding houses packed with recent immigrants. Irish, Italian, Polish names filled the columns, but she found no children listed with the surname that might connect them to orphanages. No obvious institutional residence. She tried another angle. The New Jersey State Archives held records of the Department of Charities and Corrections, which oversaw institutional care for children. Chen requested the files for Newark orphanages operating between 1905 and 1915. What arrived was incomplete. Water damage had destroyed portions of the St. Vincent's records. Newark City Hospital's records were missing entire years. But in a file marked Miscellaneous Correspondence, 1910 to 1912, Chen found a letter. It was typed on City of Newark letterhead, dated February 1911, addressed to the superintendent of St. Vincent's Orphan Asylum. The letter was brief. Confirming our discussion of February 10th, the city will continue arrangements for the temporary placement of wards in light industrial positions as part of their vocational preparation. Monthly stipends will be forwarded directly to the institution as previously agreed. Documentation will be provided by Inspector Hargrove per standard protocols. The letter was signed by someone named Thomas Calloway, Deputy Director of Municipal Services. Chen had never heard of him. She searched city directories and found him listed from 1909 to 1913 as an appointed official in the mayor's office. After 1913, his name disappeared. Chen contacted Dr. Patricia Olson, a medical historian at Columbia who had written about progressive-era pediatric care and institutional medicine. They met at a coffee shop near Penn Station. Olson was a small, intense woman with gray hair pulled back severely. She had brought her own files. "You're asking about orphan labor," Olson said after Chen explained. "It was everywhere, perfectly legal in most states until the 1920s. The rhetoric was about moral education and practical training. Idleness was considered dangerous for poor children. Work was seen as character building. But in factories? Chen asked. Not just domestic placements or farm work? Factories, yes, especially light industrial work. Textile mills loved it because children could be trained quickly and wouldn't unionize. The institutions loved it because it reduced costs. The children would be loaned for weeks or months at a time. Sometimes they'd return to the orphanage at night. Sometimes they'd be housed in factory dormitories or with foremen's families. Olson pulled out a photocopy of a medical journal article from 1909. There were occasional scandals. A child dies in a factory accident. A reformer exposes dangerous conditions, but most of it stayed quiet. And the brass tags? Chen showed her the photograph. Olson leaned close. Her expression changed. That's a morgue tag. Look at the clip. That's a medical instrument clamp. Hospitals use those to attach identification to bodies. Sometimes they'd use the same tags for charity patients in the wards. It was a tracking system. She looked up at Chen. If they sent children out still wearing those tags, it means the factory knew exactly where they came from. The tags were the proof of the arrangement. Why would the factory want proof? Chen asked. Liability, Olson said. If a child got hurt or died, the factory could show they weren't responsible for permanent placement. The child officially still belonged to the institution. The factory was just borrowing them. Chen felt something cold settle in her stomach. So, if one of these children died in the mill, they'd be returned to the hospital morgue under the number they already wore, Olson finished. No questions asked, no legal complications. The city paperwork would show a child in institutional care who died of illness or accident. The mill records would show nothing at all. That night, Chen could not stop thinking about the smallest girl in the photograph. The brass tag clipped to her collar, the absent expression on the taller boy's face, the foreman's hand resting on the middle boy's shoulder like ownership. She went back to the state archives. This time she requested death certificates for children aged 5 to 15 in Newark, March through December 1911. The clerk brought her 3 boxes. Chen worked through them one by one, looking for any connection to St. Vincent's or Newark City Hospital. She found them on her 4th hour. March 29, 1911, male child, approximately 10 years. Cause of death, industrial accident, crush injury. Place of death, Newark City Hospital. Body claimed by St. Vincent's Orphan Asylum, May 2, 1911. Female child, approximately 7 years. Cause of death, pneumonia. Place of death, Newark City Hospital. Body claimed by St. Vincent's Orphan Asylum, July 18, 1911. Male child, approximately 9 years. Cause of death, infection, compound fracture. Place of death, Newark City Hospital. Body claimed by St. Vincent's Orphan Asylum. The death certificates listed no names for the children, only institutional identification numbers. Chen cross-referenced those numbers with the ledgers she had seen in the orphanage records. The numbers matched the admissions log for children who had been marked as placed for vocational training in February and March 1911. 3 children placed, 3 children dead within 5 months, and then the placements stopped. At least, the documented ones did. Chen traveled to Newark and walked the route from where St. Vincent's had stood to the site of the Watterson Mill. The orphanage building was gone, replaced by a parking structure, but the mill's location was still identifiable. An auto parts store now occupied the ground floor of what had been a larger complex. The upper floors were apartments. Chen stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the brick facade. Somewhere in this building, those 3 children had worked. Somewhere in this building, at least one of them had been injured badly enough to die. She found the Newark Public Library's newspaper archives and searched for any mention of the deaths. She found nothing. No investigations, no articles, no reformer outcry. 3 children from an orphanage had died in a 5-month period, all after being placed in factory work, and it had not made the news. But she did find something else. A short piece from the Newark Evening News, August 1911. The headline read, "Inspector dismissed for irregularities." The article explained that Edward Hargrove, a municipal factory inspector, had been removed from his position following an internal review. The nature of the irregularities was not specified. Hargrove's name disappeared from city records after that. Chen requested Hargrove's employment file from the city clerk's office. What she received was heavily redacted. Entire pages were blacked out, but one memo remained partially visible. It was dated July 1911, written by Thomas Calloway. Inappropriate documentation of sensitive arrangements. Photographs should not have been retained. Discretion required to maintain institutional relationships. The photographs. Hargrove had taken pictures of the children in the factory. He had kept them, and he had been fired for it. Chen sat with that knowledge for 2 days before she decided what to do next. She contacted the Newark Museum, which held the city's largest collection of labor and industrial history. She asked to speak with the director of collections, a woman named Dr. Evelyn Torres. They met in Torres's office, a cramped room lined with filing cabinets and storage boxes. Chen brought the photograph. Torres looked at it for a long time, then she looked at Chen. "You want to exhibit this?" "I want people to know what happened," Chen said. "Do you have proof of what you're claiming?" Torres asked. "Not just circumstantial evidence, actual documentation that these specific children were part of this system." Chen laid out what she had. The photographer's ledger, the letter about placements, the death certificates with matching numbers, the hospital tags, Olson's testimony about the practice, the memo about Hargrove's dismissal. Torres listened. When Chen finished, Torres leaned back in her chair. "This is going to be a problem," she said. "Why?" "Because this museum receives funding from the Watterson Foundation. The family that owned that mill donated the seed money for our industrial history wing. Their descendants are still on our board." Torres held up a hand before Chen could respond. "I'm not saying we won't do it. I'm saying there will be resistance." The meeting happened 3 weeks later. Torres had assembled the museum's board, along with several staff members and 2 independent historians, to review Chen's research. Chen presented her findings in a conference room with the photograph projected on a screen behind her. She walked through each piece of evidence methodically. The brass tag, the photographer's notes, the placement letter, the death certificates, the dismissal memo. She explained the system as Olson had described it. Orphans loaned to factories, tracked by morgue numbers, returned to institutional custody when they died. A pipeline that kept factory labor costs down and orphanage budgets balanced, all while maintaining plausible deniability through bureaucratic language about vocational training. When she finished, the room was silent. Then a man at the far end of the table spoke. He was elderly, well-dressed, with the kind of careful diction that suggested legal training. "This is speculation," he said. "You have a photograph with an unidentified tag. You have some administrative correspondence that mentions placements, which could mean anything. You have death certificates that show unfortunate childhood mortality, which was tragically common in that era. But you don't have proof that these specific children in this photograph died because of factory work. You don't even have their names." Chen had expected this. "The pattern is clear," she said. 3 children placed for so-called vocational training, 3 children dead within 5 months. The inspector who documented them fired for taking photographs. The program stopped immediately after. Or, the man said, 3 orphans died of the diseases and accidents that killed thousands of poor children in that era, and the city decided the placement program wasn't cost-effective. You're constructing a conspiracy." Another board member, a woman Chen recognized as a professor of sociology, spoke up. "Even if we accept that this was an exploitative system, which I do, we have to be careful about how we present it. The Watterson family has been a pillar of this community for generations. Their descendants have nothing to do with what happened in 1911. We can't display this in a way that suggests their ancestors murdered children." "I'm not suggesting murder," Chen said quietly. "I'm suggesting a system where children's deaths were acceptable losses. That's worse." The debate went on for another hour. Some board members argued for full disclosure. Others worried about donor relationships and legal exposure. The man who had challenged Chen's evidence kept returning to the lack of names. "Without identification, this could be any children," he said. "This photograph could have been taken anywhere." Torres finally called for a vote. The board agreed to move forward with an exhibition, but with conditions. The photograph would be displayed, Chen's research would be presented, but the museum would not name the Watterson Mill specifically or implicate any families. The text would describe a documented system of exploitative child placement in Newark's industrial sector, without pointing to individual culprits. Chen agreed, though it felt like a compromise that softened the truth. But it was better than nothing. The exhibition opened 6 months later. Chen had worked with Torres and a team of designers to create a small but powerful installation. The photograph was enlarged and mounted at eye level. Next to it, a timeline showed the placement letter, the death certificates, and Hargrove's dismissal. Text panels explained the system of institutional child labor, the use of tracking tags, and the bureaucratic language that obscured what was happening. But the most powerful addition came from an unexpected source. 2 weeks before the opening, Chen received an email from a woman named Dorothy Simmons. She was in her 80s, living in a nursing home in Pennsylvania. She had seen a notice about the exhibition in a genealogy newsletter. "My grandmother worked at St. Vincent's," the email said. "She was a laundry supervisor. She told me things before she died, things she said she wasn't supposed to talk about. I think I know something about those children." Chen drove to Pennsylvania the next day. Dorothy Simmons was a small, frail woman with sharp eyes. She sat in her room with a box of papers on her lap. "My grandmother kept a diary," she said. "She wasn't supposed to, but she did. She died in 1976 and left it to my mother. I've had it since my mother passed. I never knew what to do with it. But when I saw that photograph..." She opened the box and pulled out a small, worn notebook. She wrote about the children they sent to the factories. She hated it, but she needed the job, and the nuns told her it was God's work, giving these children skills. She handed Chen the notebook. "March 1911, she said. "Read that part." Chen opened to the marked page. The handwriting was cramped, written in pencil. "They took 3 more today, 2 boys and the little girl with the cough. Sister Marguerite said the mill would give them steady meals and warm lodging, but I saw the foreman who came to collect them. He looked at them the way you look at livestock. The little girl still had her patient tag on from when she came to us from the hospital ward. They didn't even remove it, just sent her out the door. I wanted to say something. God forgive me, I didn't." The entry continued. "The girl's cough was bad. I told Sister Marguerite she needed rest, not factory air. Sister said the girl needed purpose. Idleness breeds sin, she said. I think the real sin is sending children where we know they'll suffer." Chen looked up. "Can we use this?" Dorothy nodded. "That's why I contacted you. My grandmother carried guilt about those children until the day she died. She said she could see their faces sometimes when she closed her eyes. She said the little girl cried when they clipped that tag to her dress, said it hurt her throat, but they sent her anyway." The diary excerpt was added to the exhibition. Visitors could read the grandmother's words next to the photograph of the 3 children, the little girl with the cough, the 2 boys, all sent to a factory with tracking tags clipped to their clothes like inventory. The exhibition drew more attention than Torres had expected. Local newspapers ran stories. A documentary filmmaker from New York contacted Chen about using her research. Descendants of Newark's orphan population began reaching out, sharing stories they had heard from grandparents and great-grandparents. Some remembered family members who had disappeared into factory placements and never returned. Others recalled children who came back from vocational training with missing fingers, permanent limps, or psychological damage that went untreated. But there was also pushback. The Watterson Foundation issued a statement saying the museum's exhibition misrepresented historical norms and unfairly maligned a family that had contributed greatly to Newark's development. Several board members resigned. 2 donors withdrew funding. Torres stood firm. At a public forum about the exhibition, she addressed the controversy directly. "We can't curate history to make people comfortable," she said. "These children existed. The system existed. If acknowledging that truth costs us donors, then those are donors who don't believe in our mission." Chen stood at the back of the room during the forum. She watched families move through the exhibition, parents explaining to children what they were seeing. She watched students take notes. She watched elderly visitors stand in front of the photograph for long minutes, reading every word on the wall text. After one of these viewings, a man approached her. He was middle-aged, dressed in a maintenance uniform. He had been standing in front of the photograph for nearly 20 minutes. "My great-grandfather came through St. Vincent's," he said. "We never knew much about his childhood. He never talked about it, but he had scars on his hands, bad ones. He told my grandfather once that he got them in a mill when he was young. We always thought he meant when he was a teenager, working a regular job." He looked back at the photograph. "Now I wonder." Chen didn't know what to say. The man nodded at her and walked away. The truth was, she would never know exactly who those 3 children were. Their names were lost. Their individual stories were reduced to death certificates and diary entries. But the photograph survived, and because Hargrove had taken it, despite orders not to, the evidence of what happened to them survived too. 6 months after the exhibition opened, Chen received a package from the New Jersey State Archives. Inside was a file that had been mislabeled and recently discovered during a cataloging project. It contained budget records from the Newark Department of Charities and Corrections, 1910 to 1912. The records showed exactly what Chen had suspected: monthly payments from the city to St. Vincent's Orphan Asylum and Newark City Hospital, coded as vocational training stipends. The payments matched the months when children were documented as being in factory placements. In April 1911, after the first child's death, the payments decreased. By August, after all 3 children had died and Hargrove had been dismissed, the payments stopped entirely. Chen added the budget records to the exhibition documentation. They were dry, bureaucratic numbers, but they told the story as clearly as the photograph did. The city had paid for children to be sent to factories. The city had profited from their labor. And when the arrangement became inconvenient, the city had erased the evidence and silenced the people who tried to document it. The photograph that started all of this remained at the center of the exhibition. 3 children in patched clothes, a foreman's hand on a boy's shoulder, and on the smallest girl's collar, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, a brass tag with a number stamped into the metal. Evidence that she was tracked like property. Evidence that if she died, someone knew exactly where to send her body. Historical photographs line the walls of museums and archives around the world. Family portraits, factory documentation, street scenes. They're presented as windows into the past, neutral records of how things used to be. But every photograph is constructed. Someone decided who would be in the frame. Someone decided how they would stand, where they would look, what they would wear. And in those decisions, power is made visible. The photograph of the 3 children outside the Watterson Mill is not unique. Across America in the early 20th century, thousands of orphaned and poor children were placed in factories, mills, farms, and workshops under the rhetoric of moral improvement and vocational training. Their labor was cheap. Their deaths were unrecorded. Their names were forgotten. But sometimes, someone takes a photograph. Sometimes, a detail is left visible that reveals the system beneath the surface. A brass tag, a chain, a mark on skin, a look in the eyes that shows the truth of the arrangement. And sometimes, 100 years later, someone notices. Someone asks the right questions. Someone refuses to let the official story stand unchallenged. The 3 children in that photograph died more than a century ago. Their names are lost, but their image survived. And because of one inspector's decision to document what he saw, because of one grandmother's diary, because of a researcher who looked closely at a detail most people missed, their story is no longer buried in institutional records and forgotten city budgets. They were children who wore morgue tags to factory jobs. They were evidence of a system that treated young lives as transactions. They were never meant to be remembered, but they are now.